Hello, I am Dylan Rosenblatt, reporter with the Arizona Capitol Times, and for this next week's installment of our Zoom Q&As, I am joined by Allie Bones, the Deputy or the Assistant Secretary of State for Katie Hobbs. Welcome, Allie. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Let's get right into it. Obviously, the canvassing for the 2020 primary election just happened. We saw record turnout for our primary. A lot of people are predicting that we're going to see even more record turnouts in the November election. I'm curious what exactly are you guys expecting? Like, do you have like numbers that you have a range in mind? Like, do you think we're going to hit a certain margin, or what are you guys just expecting to come for the November election?
Well, I think at this point we're preparing for a historic turnout like we had with the primary. We had a lot of excitement and interest in the presidential preference election in March, even at the start of the pandemic. And then obviously in August, we had lots of people participating in the election. We anticipate seeing records being broken again in November. So, we could have well over, we'll have millions of people voting and casting a ballot in November, and we are just doing everything we can to prepare for that, whether people choose to vote in person, vote early, or vote by mail.
So speaking of vote by mail, obviously that's been a big topic, mostly over this entire year, pretty much, especially in the last couple of months, and even more so since the pandemic began. How much of an impact are you expecting that to happen in November? Obviously, I know there was a lot of early voting for this primary. Arizona already leads most states with voting early and voting by mail. So I'm curious if there's going to be an even more increase as the general election comes.
Yeah, well, as we saw in the primary, 88% of Arizonans cast their ballot by mail or voted early. And so I think that we can anticipate that we'll see similar numbers. Arizona has a long, proud history of voting by mail and voting early, and I don't think that there will be anything that stops that for this November. We're doing everything we can to expand ballot drop boxes throughout the state so that folks who are concerned about using the mail have options in terms of dropping off their ballot. But we also are working to make sure that the U.S. Postal Service is doing everything it can to ensure the on-time delivery of ballots. As everyone knows, they have to be received by 7 p.m. on Election Day. So that is really, we anticipate continued participation in early voting and voting by mail.
So your boss, Secretary of State Hobbs, sent a letter asking for some type of investigation, sent a letter to Attorney General Mark Brnovich, who then just threw it out earlier this week. As we're recording, people won't be seeing this until the following week that we're recording. But I'm curious, what was the reaction? Were you guys surprised to see he threw it out, or surprised at some of the comments that he wrote in there? I know there was some pointed remarks that came from the Attorney General.
Yeah, I don't know that there's much that surprises us from the Attorney General's office these days, but this was an opportunity for the state's top officials that have anything to do with protecting the integrity of our elections to make sure that our election is carried out with integrity, and that the U.S. Postal Service is not doing anything, and the Trump administration is not doing anything to impede on Arizonans' rights to participate in the election via early ballot and getting their ballot back in the mail. And so we were disappointed to see that Attorney General Brnovich kind of dismissed the complaints out of hand, and didn't even think that it was necessary to conduct any kind of investigation. Obviously, we don't think that these are conspiracy theories. The president said these things out loud. There's more than 20 attorney generals across the country that have filed lawsuit against the Trump administration because of their actions with the U.S. Postal Service. There's congressional hearings. There was a hearing this morning that Senator Sinema participated in. So these are not, things that are just fringe groups saying our concerns. These are actual statements and things that have come out of the administration and the Postal Service that we think warrant investigation. The fact that the Attorney General's office disagreed or thinks that they're frivolous is really unfortunate.
I know across the country there are plenty of areas where the Postal Service started collecting and taking away mail sorting machines that have been out in the streets. Have we seen any of that in Arizona? And should Arizonans be concerned that this may be a possibility, or is that something that we shouldn't have to worry about?
Well, what we've heard is that the U.S. Postal Service is no longer going to be removing any equipment or machines between now and the November election, and that any restructuring or reorganization that they had planned will not take place until after the new year. So we feel like that at least has been stopped. And in terms of things that already happened, I think that, again, that was a reason for investigation, was to really find out exactly what's been happening on the ground in Arizona. We have heard some reports that sorting machines in Phoenix were turned off or being taken offline. We want to make sure that that isn't going to impede any kind of mail service or mail delivery. Obviously, ballots and all sorts of election mail that's going to be going out between now and the end of November is going to increase what the U.S. Postal Service is doing, but there's many areas of mail that we rely on and have concerns about. So I think that this is something that we should all just continue to be vigilant about and monitoring the actions of the U.S. Postal Service.
So moving on to the actual November election, I know in 2016 and 2018, both times that, were before you guys joined the Secretary of State's office. But it's typical that elections don't end on election night. There's ballots that need to be counted over and over again. Obviously 2018, there was a lot of controversy, which there shouldn't have been, because this is just how things work in Arizona and other states.
That's right.
I'm curious, how long do you think it will take before we have final results for everything? I know for the primary, it seemed to be a little bit faster than it was in 2018. I'm curious if we're going to see the same trend for November, or if or if it's impossible to know at this point.
Yeah, well, it'll take as long as it takes, right? So we need to make sure that we are counting every ballot and getting these races right and not making any assumptions based on anything. Like I said, with the primary, we had 88% of ballots cast early or received in the mail. And so, our election day totals were so low, it's hard to make any kind of predictions based on, who shows up at the polls on election day. One thing that has changed from 2018 to now is that the county recorders have 2 weeks to process early ballots that are received, whereas in 2018 they only had the week before the election. And so they have a lot greater, double the capacity to count those ballots leading up to election day. So the totals that they have are really going to be that they publish that in that first release at 8 p.m. are going to be all the ballots that have been received in the 2 weeks or the month prior to the election. So that certainly helps. But we need to account for all the ballots that are dropped off, on election day, all the ballots that are cast in polling locations throughout the day on election day, and then provisional ballots. Plus we have the 5-day period for voters to be able to cure any inconsistencies or problems on their signatures. So we need to at least give the county recorders those 5 days to be able to get in touch with voters and have them come in and, fix any problems that might exist with the signature on their ballots. So, it's as long as it takes. I mean, my boss took 10 days for us to know the outcome of her election. And we think that it'll take, it'll just take as long as it takes. And I think that for us, it's going to be about making sure that voters and the public and the media in particular keep in mind that, we're doing everything we can. The counties are going through all the processes to get every vote counted and to make sure that these races are called accurately.
So on that point, brings me to my next question is, do election officials across the country ever call races when they feel comfortable? And is that something that you guys would be willing to do? I know obviously the Associated Press is the one in 2018 who called the Secretary of State's race for Ms. Hobbs' opponent. And then
Right.
obviously that ended up not being true because look who's in that office now.
Right.
So I'm curious, like, because obviously election officials are the ones who have this data. Would they, it's like, okay, like, we know how many ballots are going to be left. We know that it's mathematically impossible for this person to come back. It's safe to call it. We're going to call it.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a role our elections officials have in necessarily calling races. Like that's, typically we leave that to the, people who call races. So, but I think, we will continue to provide the data and information about how many ballots are left to count, and information about what is happening out in the field. As you know, or as your listeners might know, it's the county elections officials that process and count those ballots and then report that information to the state, and then we get it out to the public. So we will continue to do that, and we will continue to provide information about just how many ballots are left, how many provisionals, and let the pundits and those folks who call those races decide how that gets reported.
What are some important dates for voters to know as we approach the November election?
So need to keep in mind the voter registration deadline, which is, of course, my computer just froze, is coming up October 5th, I believe. And then ballots will go out in that early part of October, and then election day is obviously November 3rd. We are asking that voters, if they are mailing out their ballots, that they do so no later than October 27th, which is 7 days prior to the election, and that there will be plenty of opportunities for you to drop off your ballots either in the days leading up to the election or on election day. As long as they're received by the county recorders by 7 p.m. on election day, they will be counted.
And you mentioned that it's 7 days to mail back ballot now. That used to be 6 days, so there was a change. Can you explain what went into making that decision?
So we received a communication from the U.S. Postal Service that they were recommending that we provide guidance to the public, that they said, based on their processing times, that they felt that it was safer to tell the public to mail it back 7 days as opposed to six days. So that's what we're doing. But, it's really localized guidance. We feel like it's really important that, voters in Maricopa County may have a different experience with sending mail back in than they do in Navajo or Apache County. And so we want to make sure that voters are doing everything they can to, when they get that ballot, fill it out and return it as early as possible.
And then I just have one non-election question for you,
Okay.
which for people that are watching this, like, this is the first time that you and I have actually had like a full-on conversation. So I want to say that you are one of the reasons why I began watching the show Schitts Creek.
Oh, well,
because you're such a big fan. So I'm just curious, like, who are some of your favorite characters from that show?
Oh my gosh, I love that show. So I love David and Patrick. They're my favorite characters. Their whole storyline is just one of the greatest sources of joy on TV, I think. And I just love that it's, drama free, and they just really portrayed that relationship in the way that they did. So it's one of the funniest things I've ever watched.
Agreed. Well, thank you, Allie, so much for joining me. I appreciate your time, and best of luck to you in the next couple of months. I'm sure it's going to be a busy next couple of months for you.
Absolutely will be. Thank you so much for having me.